From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Urban Outlook.
Hello and welcome to Urban Outlook. I'm April Eaton. Thank you for being with us today. On the show today, we've got an interesting conversation that we're going to have about a program that's fairly new in the area, about 6 months old, but it deals with an issue that's been in conversations far and wide and for quite a long time, and that is the prison system and how things are running there and whether inmates are getting the fair treatment. And then what about those sentences of those prisoners? The program is called No Exceptions Prison Collective. It's made up of 8 board members on the outside of the Tennessee prison system and 8 members, or about that amount, on the inside of the system. Jeannie Alexander is the co-founder and director of No Exceptions Prison Collective, and she joins us today on the show. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, April.
So before we get started about the program itself, I want to talk a little bit about you because you've got an interesting background. Some might say you started as an attorney and practiced law for a while, but then you decided first to volunteer in the prison systems and then landed a job there as well as a chaplain of Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. Can you talk a little bit about your background and your resume, if you will?
Sure. And it is kind of an unusual background, I think. So I was an attorney. I was practicing in Texas. And I didn't immediately just decide to go into prisons. I actually left the practice of law to pursue theology. I look through a theological lens at the world, and so I felt this deep calling, and I understood that I had abilities and a mind that was serving corporate interest. And I thought, is this really what God has planned for me? And it wasn't. And so I left that practice, went back to graduate school for religious studies, and I was in Atlanta. And it was in Atlanta that I first began working with homeless populations. And if you're working with the homeless, then you end up going to city jails and prisons because homeless people are arrested. And then the first time I ever went to a prison was Georgia's death row. And actually the first person I ever met in prison was Troy Davis. And that had a deep, profound impact on me. And so I moved to Nashville in 2007, was working with the homeless community here, working for economic justice, organizing, doing homeless outreach and chaplaincy work, and began volunteering at Riverbend in 2009 as a volunteer chaplain. And then, you know, at some point in time, when you're working 70 hours a week and you're adjunct teaching at a college and you're doing outreach and you're in the prison, you realize, okay, I need to focus and really put these energies where I believe they're most needed, and that was the prison.
And what needs did you see when you were working in the prison system? What sort of sparked you as, you know, I've got to really focus in here and change some things? Right.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I went into the prison as a death penalty abolitionist. You know, so when I went in, I did not approve of, I don't believe in the death penalty. I don't believe in it from a faith perspective. You can even argue it from an economic perspective if you wanted to. But I went in knowing that I already had issues with the system, if you would. Mass incarceration, I think, is an absolute stain on our country. And so I had some definite ideas. But I went in, again, because I was compelled by faith. And in so many ways, I found what I did not expect. And what that was a place full of people just like you and me, in some instances, but people who are broken by circumstances, by a past, by poverty, by lack of opportunities, and yet people who were still amazing and beautiful, people who had definitely made some tragic and terrible decisions at some point in their life. And then, of course, some people who had not and had been unjustly accused. But that's not really our focus, you know. The majority of people who are in prison are there for crimes that were committed. But I don't believe, and what I really learned on the inside, is you can't reduce a person to an action, to a moment in their life, you know? So just imagine the worst thing that you've ever done. And imagine that everyone now knows about it, and that's how you're going to be defined. So, in prison.
But there's a difference in the worst thing maybe someone's ever done versus the worst thing being a violation of a law or committing a crime, right? So somebody's one worst thing may be, I told a lie to my mom if you're a kid. But the worst things for folks in prison seem like they're a little bit different caliber. Am I wrong there?
Well, it's kind of interesting. The point of that is, well, first of all, there are plenty of people who are outside of prison who have done the same things that people inside of
Just
prison
haven't
have
gotten
done.
caught. Got that.
Or they could afford the right attorney. There are plenty of people who have gotten caught, but again, it's a matter of proper representation. But what I mean by that is that no matter what it is that you've done, in fact, you don't remain frozen for the rest of your life. You grow, you change, if you have the opportunity to. See, I believe in redemption. I believe in restoration. That's what my faith teaches me. And what I learned on the inside, and when I saw that there were people, and some still very broken, and as I said, people had made decisions, but people who had made those decisions 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 35 years ago, those are not the same people who committed the crime, who committed that action. And so people are redeemable. People do change. They aren't static creatures. We are moving, evolving, growing people every single day. And prisons are full of, yes, people who have committed murder, people who have committed robbery, who have sold drugs. But what we have to also understand is that prisons are full of fathers. They're full of mothers. They're full of sons and husbands and daughters. And there are holes in our communities. There are gaps in our culture and our society. We're missing, 28,000 people in this state alone. Almost 30,000 people in Tennessee are incarcerated. In this country, it's 2.4 million approximately. And it's certainly, there is a disproportionate effect in some communities versus others. Mm-hmm. But what I found there were just amazing people, people that wanted community, people I could be in community with, people who were intelligent, people who were engaged, people who had grown.
And so you formed 6 months ago, you left Riverbend as the lead chaplain there, and you formed No Exceptions Prison Collective. And tell us what the goal is of this program and what you hope to accomplish with it. Right.
Well, I left in a way I felt like with a mandate, from people on the inside. Because it's a new organization, but it's born out of 5 years of working with people and talking and listening to families. And if you talk about mass incarceration, there's so many issues we could address. I mean, it's a huge problem. So you have to focus. And so our focus, we have 3 areas of focus primarily. Number 1, are sentencing issues. In particular in Tennessee, the 51-year life sentences, and we can talk about those. The second focus has to do with health care. It's so often I hear someone say, oh, those prisoners, they have it so easy, they have health care, they have food, everything's provided for them. Well, health care, like so many other things in the prison, is privatized, right? So you have to make a profit. So it's a bidding process. They'll typically go with the lowest bidder. And the way you make money in prison by providing health care is by not providing health care, quite frankly. I've seen too many people who could have been treated, for example, for hepatitis C, which is entirely treatable, but if you don't, you end up with cirrhosis of the liver, you end up with liver cancer. I've held the hands of people while they died, I've seen that. And so healthcare is a huge problem in the prison system. The other issue is the Parole Board, and the accountability for the Parole Board. One of my board members, who we'll talk to soon, in Dume, he and I can both tell you so many stories of people that we've known who have served, let's say, 25 years, 26 years on a sentence, are eligible for parole, have taken every class they could, are restored individuals, have reached out to the community, have support, go up for parole. And even people that we've known with who have 4-year scholarships waiting for them, and jobs and families, and they're told, due to seriousness of the offense, they're denied parole. Well, that's never going to change, Even when it's clear the community is ready to welcome somebody back, the Parole Board can say, well, due to the seriousness of the offense, no.
But is it clear everyone in the community is willing to welcome them back? And then what about the victims or the family members left behind from whatever that crime was, right? So
absolutely.
It almost sounds like, and maybe this is what you're asking, that the Parole Board should go ahead and grant all of those inmates the time off, if you will, from their original sentence, despite the fact that there was a crime committed, despite the fact there's another side to that inmate's family, right? I know they have their family, and they're certainly missing a huge piece of that family connection of their own family, but then what about the victims involved there? Should we just ignore that side of the issue, or that side of whatever happened?
Right. No, and that's a great question, you know, and of course we shouldn't. But you know, that's the interesting thing. We have a retributive system of justice. And you can approach criminal justice from the perspective of retribution or restorative justice. So retribution is basically, it's an eye for an eye, okay? It's a strike back. The interesting thing about that is it never heals anything. It never restores a community. I have seen so many victims come to her parole board hearings 15 years after a crime, 35 years after a crime, and they're still broken. They're frozen in that moment. See, our focus in a society when it comes to criminal justice is not restoring a community, and it's definitely not restoring the victims. The victims remain victims. That is, it's interesting because that's an identity that they assume at one point in time without the proper care, without the help, without the therapy, without having their needs really met.
But they wouldn't have needed any of that had the crime not happened to them.
Oh, absolutely. But the crime,
so
of
they
course
are
they do.
frozen, but it's not their fault that they're frozen.
Nope. But that's it. They don't have to be frozen. It's not that they have to be frozen because of that crime.
But if somebody kills my mother, I am going to be frozen in time from that moment that incident happened. So you can't expect, even with counseling, that people forget what happened, right?
Of course you can't forget what happened. You know, I've seen too much. I know you can't forget what happened. No one is suggesting that you do. However, the question is, the larger question for society is, how do we proceed then? Do we want to try to restore communities? Do we want to try to heal people? The focus is not on the victim with retributive justice. It's not. You know, the state brings the case. Whereas if you look at other models of criminal justice, so this isn't something that we have to create whole cloth, okay? If you look at other countries and other models, they practice restorative justice. You look at the crime, not as an isolated incident, but you try to understand the circumstances around it. Circumstances are not excuses, but nothing occurs in a vacuum. And so you reach out to the victim's family, you actually treat them. You don't leave them hanging, you don't bring them back over and over again. You try to provide whatever they need while understanding you can never replace someone's mother who is gone, right? At the same time, you try to understand the crime itself. You understand the person who committed that offense. What's happened in their lives? What's happened in their communities? You know, is it an issue of education? Is it an issue of mental illness, which there is so much of? Really understanding, and then understanding how to make a community whole. Retribution doesn't make anything whole. It only strikes back. It doesn't heal. And so in other countries, for example...
But for some, the healing can be the punishment for that crime.
Some people may receive some satisfaction. I don't think that's healing. I haven't seen victims that heal, right?
But at least that person who did it is not walking right back out on the street again, free to do as they choose.
Well, look at recidivism rates.
And you know, that victim has changed forever, right?
Everyone has changed forever, right? And so I agree in social separation. Okay, no one is going to come up here, at least I'm certainly not, and no exceptions, isn't arguing, oh, we'll just open up all the prisons and let everyone out. That's not what we're saying. There's always a time for social separation, particularly when harm has been done. You can't allow people who are going to injure people and wreak havoc on the street, but what's the approach? If you take someone, let's say you put them in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day, or if you lock them up in maximum security, you don't provide programs, you don't provide education, you don't provide therapy when it's needed. What do you expect to get in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, right?
That's where one of that second phase of the conditions comes into play.
Exactly. If you actually care about the common good of society, then you want actual rehabilitation. You want actual restoration, because over 95% of prisoners are going to come home. People will come home. You know, and what's interesting, you say that you don't want that same person walking the street. That's the point, is that people do change. You know, people can change. People are not going to be the same person who walked that street. And the question is, do we decide that we're better off as a society warehousing people and spending billions and billions of dollars, or do we want people to eventually rejoin our community and be productive citizens? So, and do we want our recidivism rates to continue to be so high? What do we really want as a society?
That's a great stopping point there. Let's take a quick commercial break, and we're going to continue with this interesting conversation. We'll be right back after this. Stay with us.